I'm Ryan Webb. I'm Conversion Analytics Director within the digital marketing practice at WeLocalize. A critical part of my role is to work with clients to understand and improve the digital journeys their customers take online. And that's why I'm so excited to be able to host today's webinar. How do you provide an amazing customer experience? A quick introduction for those who don't know WeLocalize. We're one of the world's leading language service providers. We help our clients reach, engage, and grow international audiences by delivering innovative solutions such as localization, data transformation, AI enablement, and digital marketing. Working with our clients across those different areas means we're incredibly well placed to help them understand and improve the experiences of their customers around the world. I'll introduce our panel shortly, but first, while we give a little time for some more people to join, we're going to put a live poll on the screen. You should be able to see that shortly. To make today's session interactive, we've got 2 polls and also an opportunity to ask questions. For this first poll, we'd like to know who is responsible for customer experience within your organization. Would you say that it's a single person, a dedicated team, a mix of people across teams, or are you unsure? While we wait for some more people to answer, I'll explain a little bit more about today. There'll be time at the end of the presentations for Q&A, so over the next 25 minutes or so, please enter your questions in the questions box on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll answer as many of those questions as we can at the end. There's also a handout available on that right-hand side. That handout contains some further reading that relates to the content we're covering today, and it's also got some links for contact information and things like that, so check that out. This webinar is being recorded and we'll share it with all those who've registered in a few days, and also we're going to send out a request for you to complete a quick survey about today's webinar. All that feedback that you give is incredibly useful, so please do take a few minutes to respond to that. It's really, really appreciated. Right, I'm just going to now take a very quick look at those initial results. So the poll is telling me that we've got a mix of people across teams. 62% of people have answered that it's a mix of people across teams who are responsible for CX. So that's quite interesting. We've got 10% is a single person, 29% is dedicated. Nobody has said that they're unsure. So it seems like you're all quite clear on whose responsibility it is. But then actually you then copped out and you've said that it's 62% is a mix of people across teams. So it's kind of a shared responsibility, which is quite interesting. That's probably why we've got such a mix of stakeholders who have joined to log in today. And hopefully, as we go through, we'll answer, give an answer to that amazing customer experience question for all of those different stakeholders to try and help according to that. So that's really interesting. So with that in mind, I'm going to now move on to the introductions. So first up today, we're going to have Rebecca from CSA Research, and Rebecca will cover some of the key factors that impact global customer satisfaction online. Rebecca, give us a quick wave. Then we have Joe from SearchStar, who are part of WeLocalize, and Joe's talk will give you some fantastic advice on how to map out the key touch points along your customer's global journey. And then finally, we have Michael from WeLocalize, who's pulled together the essential tips to ensure your multimedia content delivers customer delight in any language. The presentations should take us roughly 25-30 minutes, and then we'll have around 15 minutes left at the end to go through the questions that hopefully you'll be posting through in the right-hand side. So that is the introductions done. I will now hand over to Rebecca, who will start off with the first presentation. So over to you, Rebecca.
All right, thank you, Ryan, and again, welcome to everyone. So what I wanted to let you know here is WeLocalize invited me to come present today because we focus on market research for global customers such as you, in terms of people who have people out in the markets outside of their home market. And so what we help people do is to make sure that they've got the data they need to make their decisions. And we just recently did a lot of research on the global customer journey. And so we wanted to share that with you to show you sort of how you can use language as a wow factor, the data that you need for that, and then to see where those journeys break down. So when we did this, and you can go on to the next slide there, Ryan, I want to talk a little bit too, though, about the effects of the pandemic on both the B2C and B2B journeys, and then we'll talk about the other things I mentioned. When we collected this, the company CSA Research has been around for about 20 years, and it's similar to Forrester or Gartner. In fact, our CEO and founder are originally from Forrester, but we focus only on global markets. And so we're helping companies go global and then stay global and hopefully deliver what turn out to be eventually amazing customer journeys. So for the data we'll show you in just a second, we used customer panels, and we went to around 8,700 people, and we did panels both for B2C and for B2B. On the B2C side, we went to, I think we covered 29 countries, and then for B2B, we covered 24. So what I'm going to show you will be some of that data so you can see how that would fit in with your business plans. But first, I want to show you somebody else's research, just to sort of emphasize what's happened here with the journeys and how they have changed. I'm sure that for any of you who follow just the general business press, you've seen quotes about, oh, we've jumped ahead 2 years in terms of going online, 10 years in our digital journeys, whatever that might be. But what you're seeing here from McKinsey is actually just for the US market, but it shows the huge jump within the first few months of the pandemic back in March. Now, what they say from their data, basically, we jumped ahead 10 years in terms of the volume of growth and who was looking at it. And this applies to both B2C and B2B. But what I wanted to point out is that, of course, there are countries like Korea and China who were ahead of the US, but in general, this is a worldwide thing where all of us know we're all at home doing the same thing, buying things online. So the next slide from McKinsey will show you the difference that has happened on the B2B side. And I know many of the companies in the audience are from that side. So don't worry so much about the numbers here. What I want you to focus on are the black and the blue that are on the left and through the middle. And these are across, I think they did 11 countries and around 3,600 respondents for this one. And what they were asking people on the B2B side was, okay, what are you using to reach? What is your sales model now? And so what they were asking was how much video conferencing and that kind of thing was happening. So the numbers in blue and black show you how much has changed from the traditional thing of phone calls or reaching out with material. So all of this is digitalized, as I said, on the B2B side. So what that means is that B2B companies are forced to focus much more now on the D2C experience. And so on the next slide, it's just a reminder that really all of us now, whichever side, if you're selling to the government, to consumers, to B2B, it is a direct to consumer, which is what D2C stands for. And that means there are going to be a lot more materials and content that have to be in multiple languages to reach the markets that you want to go to. And not only that, you need a strategy actually to make sure all the programs that back that up and all the post-sales things can support those customers. And what people are finding, especially with all the multilingual, more of us are doing those events, companies have discovered, oh yeah, it's a lot easier to reach our international customers because all they have to do is come on virtually. So I'm sure a lot of your companies are now dealing with those opportunities, which is wonderful because language really does become a wow factor during that. Okay, I'm going to show you some of the data now so that you have a feeling of what's happening during a customer journey. So this is a very simplified view up here. I'm going to switch to B2C now, but as I told you, we've also got data to back up B2B. So what you're looking at here are the different phases: awareness, consideration, purchase, support along a customer journey. And then you'll see all these little check marks and these little red lines here. And what we're pointing out here are the various stages of that journey. So Ryan, if you can click for the next step, we'll bring up a few speech bubbles here to show what we're talking about. So again, you can see the slides later on if you really want to get into the text, but what these speech bubbles are showing you are the types of content that need to support each one of these stages. So when we take a look at the customer journey and we put the consumer panels together for this research, we ask them a lot of questions along each step of the journey. And one of the things that I wanted to point out here during the consideration phase, for example, we ask about user reviews. And the question we asked was, well, if you don't have any other material in a local language, would you still prefer products that at least provided you with user reviews in your language? And out of the thousands of people who were participated in this panel, around 75% of them, 73% of them said yes, that they would definitely prefer products with user review in their language. So this big red arrow here is showing you what may be at risk if you choose not to localize user reviews, for example. And of course, it depends on what vertical you're in. They're more important for some than for others. I want to point out at this point also that I'm showing you the general results of all this data that we collected. We also have breakdowns by English competency and by country, so that you could look at the 29 countries and go, okay, well, the Turks seem to prefer user reviews, the Russians or the Indonesians or the Germans are not accessing them as much. You could make, decisions for your content that way. All right, let's go on to the next step of the journey. And again, there are lots of steps in the journey. I'm only going to be showing you 4 today. This, again, on the consideration phase, and you'll see some other speech bubbles coming up there because this is the kind of content, that you would need to provide for this stage. So if you'll bring up the next piece, yeah. In this case, we asked, we asked them if they agreed with the statement or how much they agreed with the statement, that they'd prefer to purchase something only if the user instructions or owner's manual is in my language. And you'll notice the red arrow here, the people at risk or less. It's about 41% who said, yeah, I've got to have that information or I'm really not interested in the product. One of the reasons this is so much less than the 73% that I just showed you on the user reviews is that now via YouTube and other streaming services, people have a lot of information in their own language for products and services, even if the company producing them themselves doesn't show this. But still, if you're in a vertical and you've got 40% or so, at risk, that's still a big part of your total addressable market. So it's still sizable. All right, the next stage I think is the purchase stage. And again, there's a lot more, you've got to know what's happening with your deliveries. You may be chatting with people to find out where a delivery is. You may have questions about payment, that kind of stuff. So those are all the things that need to be localized. Now for this stage, one of the questions we asked was, well, when you have the choice to buy 2 similar products, are you more likely to purchase the one that has product information in your language? And no surprise here, around 76% of people said yes, they would prefer that. We also ask about branded global brands versus brands that are not as well known, so that we could go down. But again, the percentages were about the same. So the point of this is that way over 50% of your market may be out of your reach if you don't localize into the languages that you need to support what you're trying to do in your market share. And you also have to be aware these days, of course, that it's not just the other international companies against which you're competing. Many times there'll be local companies that are very strong, obviously, because they start out in the local language of that market. And so you need to be judging yourselves against them as well as other people who may be localizing. And then once we get to the support part of the phase, whether you need information, whether you're having trouble with a function or can't find what you want, obviously it's fairly important here to have stuff localized as well. And you'll see this jump back up again to around 75% of people who said yes, I'm more likely to purchase the same brand again or the same product if the after sales care is in my language. And we also ask several other questions in this area as we did in the others, and we find that this in-language support is very, very important for post-sales. So for any of you looking at your knowledge bases or other parts, you might want to talk to WeLocalize and figure out how to do that. And of course, with the quality of machine translation, it's becoming much easier these days to do that as well and provide some, fairly decent translation for a good price. All right, I think that's all we have on the customer journey, but I wanted to point out again what you're looking at here is a country breakdown on the right for all 29 countries that we included in the research. And then on the left, you're looking at English competency. So for every one of these 40 or 50 questions we ask, we have the same information, the breakdown in these 2 areas, so you can actually take a look. So if you bring up the summary slide, Ryan, I want to remind people that for any of you, I think all of you probably know it, but just remember whatever area you're in, whether it's B2B, B2C, or a mixture, it's all really for the next year or so or more really direct to consumer. And we're fairly sure that this trend will continue that way. Language really can be a wow factor, but you need the right data to figure out to make sure that you're really laser focused on what you need to localize. So it's not so much, that you need to translate and localize everything, but to work with companies like WeLocalize to make sure that you're really localizing what you need to for whatever your criteria might be. So I'm going to hand off now to Joe, or actually back to Ryan, I guess. And Ryan, I'll let you take over. Joe's going to go into the customer journey.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was awesome. Thank you very, very much. That was some great insights there. Just a glimpse of the brilliant research that you do. I think we've got contact details for you at the end of the presentation and also in the handout on the right-hand side. But can you just remind me, is it possible for people to get in touch with you to find out more about the research that you?
Sure, you can click on that. I'm at Rebecca@csa-research.com, and we're glad to talk to any of you. So feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Fab. Okay, Brill. So that research, obviously, that Rebecca showed us reinforces our understanding and our belief that delivering that excellent customer experience is essential. But of course, actually doing that is another thing. So where do you start? And there's a whole host of things that we could talk about, the potential starting points, but we think a really, really sensible place to start is with one thing in particular, and that's actually understanding that customer journey. So to help understand where you can start and how you can do that, I'll hand over to Joe, who will take us through some tips on that.
Cool, thank you very much, Ryan. Hi, everyone. I'm Joe. I'm a senior conversion consultant at SearchStar. So Rebecca's talk was helping us to understand trends in the global customer experience. Now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how to understand your specific customer experience. How can we get to grips with the different touch points that your customers go through on their path to purchase? Who owns those various touch points? And how can we adapt that framework for new markets? So let's jump in. So it may seem like a bit of a no-brainer, but there are actually so many reasons to go through this exercise of building a customer experience map in the first place. And I'm just going to go through some of the main ones now. So the first one is it allows us to build empathy for customers and begin to understand how the experience plays out from their point of view instead of just ours. It helps us to build a kind of macro or helicopter view of every interaction that a typical customer has in a sequence of steps. And it also helps to break down organizational silos that may have built up over time, teams that operate as individual business units, and actually helps to break down those barriers and create a common language between the departments. It also instills a fantastic customer-centric approach across the whole organization. And lastly, it's actually an international toolkit. So customer experience mapping allows us to plan that experience in markets or regions where you might not even yet be present, which is very cool. So for the rest of this presentation, I'm going to be going through the step-by-step process of how you would map that customer experience. So we're going to go into a little bit more detail into each of these 6 phases now. First one being defining the customer and scope. So to begin with, you really wanted to define exactly what the objective is of your exercise. Is this an exercise in improving the customer experience globally or just for one specific market? And next, you're going to need input from all the relevant departments that the experience touches. So for instance, if you're looking at the process of becoming a new customer, then it would be really useful to have stakeholders from both sales and marketing. Next, specify the journey and the time frame that you're looking to map. Are you talking about a short experience that takes place over a few minutes, for example, making a purchase in an online store, or one that takes several weeks, for example, buying a new car? Next, try and define as best as possible the target customer. If you can, collectively create a persona which brings to life that customer and that you can all agree upon. Are they from the US or from Japan or somewhere else? What are their goals and their pain points? Be as specific as possible because this will become the lens through which you look at the entire experience. Okay, looking next at identifying stages. So stages are the high-level sections of the experience. And we touched on those in the last presentation from Rebecca, but they could be, for instance, out of market, consideration, evaluation, purchase, experience, and loyalty. Now these, you don't have to go with these ones. These are just examples. And really, ideally, you should be personalizing this to fit your unique experience. And after you've done that, you want to start adding some lanes that run across those different stages from left to right. So in this example here and the lanes that I would recommend you use, goals and mindset is the first one. So what are the thoughts and beliefs that the customer holds as they go through this journey? Touch points, what are the channels that the customer uses to interact with your company? What's the content they're engaging with? Strengths, so where are you currently performing well at each stage and each touch point? What's your content like at this point? Weaknesses, what are the shortcomings of your customer journey at this point? Is some of the content not relevant or not localized for this audience? Opportunities, so what measures can be introduced to improve that customer experience? And lastly, process ownership, and this is really important. Who is actually going to be the person or team which will carry forward and action these opportunities after you've finished this exercise? Next, stage 3, gathering information. So this is the part where we do our homework. This is a process of gathering data and artifacts that you can uncover about the existing customer experience. And the more complete the research, the more complete the picture will be at the end. So a lot can actually be learned from stakeholders and people who know a lot about the customer experience and various parts of that experience already. But actually, there's lots of other places where you can look to gather that data. So you can actually speak to real customers, user research by doing interviews, usability tests with websites, surveys, focus groups. You can speak to the customer service teams who speak to your customers day in, day out. They have lots of information that can be useful. Analyzing data from your web analytics, such as Google Analytics, and actually from your social platforms as well. And if you have bricks and mortar stores, then speaking to the staff in retail stores and doing surveys that way. So the research should be geared towards your persona. So if your target customer is in another country, you can gather this research from an international panel. For example, a client of ours is soon expanding into Japan. So we've been helping them plan their Japanese website by conducting user testing with people from Japan to understand how the online experience should differ in that country. Okay, number 4. So this is the fun part. It's when we start to pull together all of that research and data that we've done in the last step. So the goal of a customer experience workshop is to co-create a draft map for the persona that you've defined. So this is where that kind of helicopter view that we talked about earlier really begins to come to life. So you should really have representatives from across the whole experience, for example, marketing, sales, and customer service, that will help to create that shared language and flesh out what that whole picture looks like. It's usually best done in a meeting room with a large wall or big whiteboard, but nowadays we prefer to do this online using a virtual whiteboarding tool such as Miro. Just make sure there's plenty of space for the team to populate the grid with lots of post-it notes. Then you're going to start to cluster those data points that you've gathered in the previous stage. Doesn't need to look pretty at this point, so don't worry about that. And ideally, you should have a couple of impartial workshop leaders to challenge and kind of move the conversation along and note take. This will make things move much quicker and easier and make sure everyone's voice is heard. Okay, step 5. So now we want to translate that workshop output into a visually appealing designed map if possible. So this should ideally be accompanied by maybe a short summary, which expands upon some of those key findings and the opportunities that you've discovered. And ideally, this also should be distributed to all of the participants that help to create that map in a way which is going to be useful and easy to comprehend, so that the people that have who have ownership over the different work streams can actually get to work on them. This exercise really is only worthwhile if the output is going to be used and not hidden away in a drawer somewhere left to gather dust. So ideally, it should be a living document that's tacked onto a wall, or maybe exists as a digital dashboard that everyone can refer back to afterwards. And then lastly, step 6, iterate and refine. So customer experience mapping is a framework, and it's a framework for planning activity across the whole journey. And if you want to prove that that plan worked, you really need to start attaching KPIs for each stage of the journey so you can measure whether the dial is moving in the right direction. And also, there's an old saying that goes, the map is not the territory. And that means the landscape shifts over time and you really need to update your maps to account for that. So there are factors outside of your control, such as market dynamics, customer attitudes, and your competitors, which will mean that your customer experience changes from month to month. So make sure you keep revisiting this framework and refresh it with data points, with new research as well, to see if your strategies are still relevant. And lastly, and I mentioned this already, but it's maybe the coolest thing about customer experience mapping, is that this process is a framework that you can apply to any country and for customer experiences that don't even exist yet. So if you're planning to launch a new service in a new region or a country, you can start to anticipate the needs of your customers by plotting an imagined experience. What are the steps that they would go through? How would they think, feel, and act differently? And how can we deliver content to them which is localized? I hope that gives you a good idea of how to get started with mapping the customer experience. And thank you very much for listening.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe. That was brilliant. We will come back to that a bit more in the Q&A at the end, and we'll discuss how people can get in touch for more info on how we can help arrange customer journey and customer experience workshops for clients. But we'll come back to that again. But thank you very much. Before we actually do hand over to Michael for the final presentation of the three, I'd like to put another live poll on screen. Michael is going to be focusing in on another specific area to give us tips on delivering great customer experience. That's around multimedia content. So we'd like to know how much video content you're producing at the moment and whether you're producing it in multiple languages. So are you producing much video content? None. Some English language only, some in multiple languages, or lots English language only. So if you can, I'll give you a few seconds to answer that. And at the moment, the results are still coming in, but it's pretty categoric, really, that we've got over 50% of people, so sort of towards 60% of people are saying that they're producing some in multiple languages. So it's good to, obviously, I think that's fairly hopefully representative of the localization audience that we've got in, the clients that we've got in that are operating in more than one country, more than one language. So we've got some content, multiple languages. So I think that means that probably prefer to do a little bit more if we could, but there's definitely some. So you're definitely talking to the right people here, Michael, as I hand over to you, and you can hopefully help those people that are already doing some of that content find out easier ways to do more of it. So I'll hand over to you.
Excellent, thank you very much. Hello everyone, my name is Michael Anderson and I am the Customer Multimedia Lead for WeLocalize, and I've been with WeLocalize for 10 years. My team and I support our clients with their multimedia localization journey. Our team helps clients with projects from initial planning, with developers incorporating best practices, to localization ready project files to help manage pre-production, production, and post-production workflows. More and more of our clients are using interactive presentations, videos with narrations, and on-screen text elements that are designed to capture the attention of the viewer. Here's the type of multimedia projects we support regularly. Subtitling, where the spoken audio is displayed as text on the video in the source content. Voiceover, where video is recorded of the source audio and synchronized with music and effects to the source. E-learning, which is full course build, localization with audio, OST, and then on-screen text animations and motion graphics localized in video, from static text to text that flies into the screen, does a spin, and lands. With all multimedia projects, it is important to think ahead for localization in the early stages of development. This will help save time and resources. Localization is more than just translation. Change in the language is just the first step. It's followed by design and visual modifications. Before you start localization, here are some key tips for loc-friendly MM projects. Completed source files. Failure to provide clean final content can be costly. Gathering all project files from creative teams will ensure localization-ready production and less time and cost having to recreate. Have editable text layers and production files or textless video files that can be easily recreated. Example, recently we had a client that did not provide editable source or textless video, and the provided source content has subtitles already burned into the videos. And to overlay the localized subtitles would cause overlapping. The request was to remove the existing subtitles in source, and each 1 second of video is 30 frames. So to remove the text required to remove frame by frame. So 1 minute video required removing 1,800 frames. With editable project files and text layers, it would have been much easier to just swap out the text, go to the text layer, swap it out, and then localize over the top. And it would have been less engineering, about 80%, instead of having to create the files from scratch. When building localization projects, it is key to create content that is universal and can be used across all target markets. For voiceover projects, allow music that can be re-engineered easily. Minimize the voiceover talents. The more VO talents in source, the more voiceover talents to record the localized content. Universal fonts in graphics, animations, and subtitles. Consider the target languages for localization and the associated character sets. Select international stock images. This avoids the requirement to source and integrate costly market-specific content, such as image and copy screenshots, software product. All of that would take, recreation. Most languages are longer. Oh, sorry, next slide. Most languages are longer than English by about 15%. Languages such as Russian take up to 40% more space. This should be taken into account when storyboarding, developing, and integrating components such as text boxes, graphics, and audio. Here are some tips for expansion. Leave generous padding around all objects in your screen layouts. For voiceover projects, sync audio and text to allow easy transitions for expansions. And then allow extra time for voiceover language expansions through the use of pauses or deliberately slower speaking pace. Subtitling comes in a few options, and it's important to plan what end experience you want. Open captions are rendered into videos, creating separate videos for each language, where closed captions are typically delivered as SRT format that is used within media players, where captions can be selected. Here are some tips for setting up subtitle projects. Leave the lower third of video free to accommodate subtitles. Agree on the subtitle style up front, and consider web video players that support captions. Here's a checklist of things to keep in mind for the type of MM project you will be doing. These are great takeaways to use as reference for the type of projects. Thanks for listening in on this session on MM. Please reach out if you ever need any support on your next multimedia projects. Thank you.
That was brilliant, Michael. Let's I think now what we'll do is we will dive into the Q&A. So we have had a few questions coming through, and remember, anybody, that the questions panel is on the right-hand side if you'd like to ask us anything. So please go ahead and pop your questions into that section. But to kick us off, I'd just like to ask you all something myself, and I think that it's great that we've got this ability to be incredibly relevant locally. We've got these research and we've got these tools and these different ways that we go about making sure that we've got that local relevance. But how do we, can each of you give me a tip, please, on how you go about doing that while also keeping this level of global consistency, this centralization that all businesses obviously want to have as well, to make sure that people are doing things in a standard way? So if I start with you, Rebecca, what would you say to that?
I think at a holistic global level, I'd remind people that the vertical in which they're in and their corporate culture will help determine some of this. And also the maturity of a company within its vertical, and even associated with its international market. So companies will tend to swing back from being fairly decentralized at the beginning when they're first starting. Then the move will be to centralized. You may have some countries who aren't too happy, but you eventually get into a centralized mode. And then once a company's really large, many times if there are strong business units and that kind of stuff, there may be, separate functions, which are all okay as long as people are communicating. So I'm not there's no one answer to this. It's just to be aware that your model may be working, even if it's not centralized, as long as everybody's communicating, and that's the big challenge.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for that. Joe, what do you think?
So yeah, I completely agree with that. I think, so for me, this comes back to that kind of research-led approach, and it being really customer-centric as much as possible. So what I was saying before about doing user research in different markets, if you can do that successfully with the different markets that you're looking to have presence in, then you'll begin to find what those different unique behaviors, needs, and expectations are in each market, because they're all going to have different interfaces that they use, different platforms, different cultural standards. So once you've done that, you should start to find out what is shared amongst those markets, and also what you need to localize, so you can redesign your product or your service accordingly. So you might find that there's actually lots in common in terms of what people expect from an online experience in the UK and the US, but it might be quite different when you are looking to expand into an Asian country like Japan or something like that. There's just lots of different factors there. But there will, so yeah, I think it comes down to just doing that research, because you can't assume, as appealing as it might be, that you would want to just use all of the same assets and just launch into different markets. That they're going to be relevant and useful there. So I think it comes down to, just speaking to real people and understanding what their different expectations are.
Makes sense
And
as
if
well.
I can jump in before Michael gets to put his 2 cents in,
Go for it.
what Joe said about doing the research, many times we'll find the domestic teams don't know how to do that, or they come back to a localization team and kind of say, well, this is your problem. Don't you guys know what the customers do in these countries? So don't feel that you're on your own. Reach out to us or reach out to We Localize, because there are ways to do that. And some markets do it differently than others. It would be all that I would point out. And one other thing, as Joe said, yes, the experience may differ, but what we find a lot is too, depending on what country this stuff is coming from, sometimes people in another country will really be looking for that same experience. And so you may end up you're not adapting the experience as you might have thought you would 5 years ago, but you'll never know that unless you actually know what those customers and prospects think. So I'll get off my soapbox. Your turn, Michael.
We'll come back to that in a second, actually, because of one of the questions that come through. But Michael, let's finish with you on the original question.
I would say the big thing is language expansion. When you're developing that source, make sure you have space, because a lot of times we'll get source where it's just overly crowded, and what's happening there is you're dropping the font down much smaller, and it's just not as good for the end user. The other thing is project files. Get editable project files. We'll see images that are embedded and we don't have the editable files, and that just causes a lot of extra work and time to rebuild that. So when you're developing the files, get everything as much as you can editable to our team, because in that way it's really a lot easier a long way, and it'll save a lot on costs as well.
Okay, fab. So really, it comes down to planning ahead, doesn't it, and investing time well in advance of what you're trying to do in research and planning and templating. That's the kind of like the summary, the common theme across all of those. So brilliant. That was great. Thank you, guys. That makes a lot of sense. So one of the questions we've come in kind of follows on from that a little bit, and it's mentioning the fact that Rebecca, you touched upon the fact that about the reviews being from customers in their own language and the importance of that, as well as some of the other elements of content being in their language. But the question is, does it make a difference whether the customer knows that the review itself is translated or whether it was originated from somebody actually in that country themselves?
It's a very good question. A lot of people ask it these days because the quality coming out from MT in many, many languages now is much better. So what we find, I'm going to answer first for technical support content, and then I'm going to come back and answer about user reviews. We find more and more companies now for their technical content, their support and their knowledge bases and the articles and whatever, don't even bother to say that it's machine translated at this point. Quality is good enough, but they also actually keep checking on it to make sure that it's meeting expectations. But rather than setting the expectation up front, okay, this is machine translated content, I should look at it differently or maybe not trust it. They're just not even putting that on now. Some companies do. They feel that they need to be transparent. When it comes back to user reviews, I think maybe because I know that some of the machine translation that's been done, you don't want to make it look too perfect, and yet that's what's coming out with MT right now. So I think it would be probably up to the company and sort of what their vertical and what their customers sort of expect within those countries. We have additional data that actually shows about frequency of usage and also acceptance of MT by country. So it's important to look at those as well. So to answer that, I think for me personally, if I were making that decision, I'd just look at each country individually and see what the acceptance was, and then decide, is it really necessary to put the disclaimer on? What are my competitors doing? That kind of stuff. So again, no one answer, but you can certainly decide by country and vertical what you want to do. Okay, but it's changing.
Right.
It's
I might add a tiny bit to that, if that's okay, which is just from the research that we've done when looking at expanding into other countries and speaking to end users and their expectations of a website, the feedback we generally get, and this is obviously, this, you should caveat this by saying every country is unique, but generally speaking, they're looking for reassurance and examples of local companies, so brands that are either using this service or people that have used that product. So I think as far as possible, it should be, you should strive to have examples or reassurance signals and social proof from local people, I think, just as from a sort of best practice point of view, I think.
Which leads us on very nicely to another question that we've had that's come in that's about user testing, and it's in relation to something that you said, Joe, and it's asking. We mentioned about expanding into Japan. Can you expand a little bit more about how we actually did that user testing and got that feedback from that customer base?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so so just to recap on the challenge, so this was a client who has lots of presence in the US and Europe, and they already have a presence in Japan, but they didn't have a localized website, so they were looking to launch a localized website in Japan. But before doing that, they wanted to do some research into what the different UX trends and expectations are for Japanese users so that we can anticipate those needs. So what we did was we took the global website and we set tasks for Japanese users. So we have an online panel that we have for international users that we can set tasks for those users to complete, and we can essentially observe them performing those tasks, then ask for their feedback about how their experience, sort of how they found that experience, but also ask them to look at existing websites in Japan for their competitors. Some of them have already launched there, so we actually asked them to look at some of their competitor websites who already have a Japanese website, and ask them to do the similar tasks, and also to get their feedback on what they think those websites are doing well and what they're not doing so well. So that was the sort of predominant strategy there, and I think that once that website is launched, we'll go back and do a second round of user testing just to try and validate our original conclusions.
Yeah, thank you. I think that answers the question well. I've got one more question, so if anyone wants to nip in with another question before the end, then please put it in the question panel on the right hand side. But the final question is asking about stakeholders and saying, are we seeing localization teams working with other teams in business, and what stakeholders are we seeing those teams working with? So I don't know, I think all three of you can probably have a view on this. Michael, if we start with you, when you get briefed on the content requirements, do you get briefs from multiple directions, or do they normally come in from quite a specific localization perspective?
Yeah, so we work with project management teams, so they're getting scope details from the client, and we have processes that help us define what the scope of the project is, because a lot of times there's a lot of different ways they can go. So what we do is we have a central form that gets filled out. We work with a project manager, who are working with different stakeholders on the client side, and then a lot of times we're included on client phone calls where we help educate them. We're talking to their developers, whatever, as they are building out their content. And in fact, we're doing something with a client right now. They just sent us a big e-learning package, and they're like, how loc-friendly is this? So we're actually looking at those files, we're pulling it apart, we're taking all of our checklists. Okay, this has got some great space here, there's multiple characters. So we're giving them feedback, and it's gonna help them as they develop going forward with that e-learning content. So to answer the question, we work directly with our project managers within We Localize, but then they work with the stakeholders, and then again, we're included on phone calls as needed. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Rebecca, how about you? What do you tend to see?
We tend to see that you've got to work together on this. So any of you out there in the audience, either on the marketing or localization, or even within another team, knowledge management, whatever it is, if you're working in your silo without working with the localization people or vice versa, then in the end, you'll end up spending a lot of extra time spinning your wheels and that kind of stuff. And we understand that it's not easy, but this doesn't work if you're not collaborating, especially these days as we're all moving to video and all this stuff that Michael has been talking about. You cannot work in your own space and do this on your own. So that would be my plug. Make sure that you're reaching out to somebody after today's webinar. Think about really what it takes to, to deliver this stuff to a customer.
Okay. And then kind of like a slight spin on that, Joe, just obviously a key part of what the work that you're doing is working on in these workshops. So you mentioned that you want to have the right people in that room, but you obviously you don't want too many people in there either. I know we've had experience of having lots and lots of people with lots of different opinions in there. Have you got any tips for people as to how to get the right people in the room, or how to manage that? And if you've got any words of wisdom on managing egos as well, I'm sure people would happily take those as well. But
one thing I will say is that it's a lot easier to do it in a virtual environment than it is in a real life environment. But yeah, okay, some quick tips would be, ideally, you don't want to have more than 8 people in that call, otherwise it can start to feel just too crowded and it's very hard to get everyone to have their voice heard. So you ideally want to limit the number of people to 8 or less. But at the same time, you want to make sure that there is fair representation from across that whole experience. So as we were saying, if you're looking at the full customer journey, then really you want to have someone representing from acquisition, so probably sales and marketing, to onboarding and that customer experience, and then also retention and loyalty. So people that are going to be actually have the full range of knowledge across the board. So that's probably, if you can, 4 to 5 people, plus the impartial, and I do stress impartial, leaders in the room who can try and check and sort of challenge in a sort of diplomatic way, and also steer the conversation so that it's still productive. That's really important. Otherwise, you can get sort of, I guess, derailed, or you can get stuck on a particular point, and it's good to just keep that momentum up. But yeah, those are probably my top tips.
Awesome, that's brilliant. And coincidentally, that's exactly on time as well for when we were planning to finish. So thank you for that, everybody. I've thoroughly enjoyed your company and your presentations, and thanks everybody for joining us today. If you've enjoyed this webinar about customer experiences, then please take a look at the other webinars that we've got. This slide has been up for a while now, so you've had plenty of time to see it. So lots of that content is available on demand on the WeLocalize website, welocalize.com/webinars. And also, please keep in touch if you're interested in boosting your 2021 localization strategy. One way that we can help you is by helping plan that customer journey mapping workshop, but we've got a bunch of other ways that we can help you as well, and we'll work alongside CSA to help in any way that we can. So please get in touch either with your WeLocalize representative or email us info@welocalize.com. Otherwise, have a fantastic day and hope to see you next year. Thank you very much.